Ian Siegel, what a pleasure. How are you this very
Wes
fine
Carroll.
day?
I'm well. It's nice outside here in Virginia. I'm down by the land again. So yeah, how's it in California?
-10 and snowing here in... No, I'm just kidding. Of course, it's 68 like it always is here. It's beautiful.
Amazing. So what's been going on in Wes's world?
Yeah, it's lovely. Oh my gosh, so much, man. I just got back from a week's vacation with the family, so there's much less to report than there might be. I have a new tie-dye shirt from summer camp, and we made some pottery doodads that we put our plants into, and so there's little stuff like that. Had a lovely time. But man, coming back, I'm really hitting a real wall in trying to be productive and all that kind of good stuff today, and it's kind of, I don't know. There's a lot of, oh my gosh, why can't I do blah, 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 blah. And then trying to turn off that inner voice and just, okay, what's actually going on here? Let's take a breath and see what's what. And, and what I'm finding is that, as we've talked about before, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but you and I have talked about it before. I feel like the pace of modern life and of modern business is just sort of unsustainable. But when you really get down to the important stuff, it's like, oh no, it's not unsustainable. It's just that I've, allowed my focus to widen. I've said yes to too many things. I'm, worried about all the various things going on in my head instead of just, okay, you know what? My job is to do this. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to stop worrying about it. That's easy to say, hard to do. How's about you?
I do find myself winnowing down as much as I can these days and trying to figure out, what are the things I should be doing, because same problem, right? In terms of just overextending myself, just being so excited by things. So I'm like, wow, this seems great. This seems great too. And I always kind of, I always assume like the best version of myself is going to be tackling all these things. And of course it's not, right? And so I'm like, right, I'm assuming that, and it's challenging. And I think what I wanted to talk about today was in our pillow exchanges, you were talking about things I've just generally agreed with in terms of like how to. I mean, this goes back to our conversation, like how are we going to continue to build this podcast in terms of doing what we're best at, and
Sure.
And I think it's a helpful exercise to talk about, what does it even mean to be good at something? Or what are the factors at play that make you, quote unquote, good at something? Because that was the only piece of it that, I would love to dig deeper into, because, well, for one reason, I have a really bad problem with seeing past the now and seeing the potential with people, which means that I think there's in a book called Traction, it talks about like how to evaluate people on a team, or just honestly, could it even be like a partner in life or anything? I always bring it back to that, but
Sure.
It's capacity, it's willingness, like they want it, and are they ready for it? And I will ignore the shit out of number 2 and number 3 and just get enamored with capacity with this. I guess it's because, and again, I like, this kind of goes back to my own experience with kind of like demolding my brain, that at a certain level, the ability to learn something becomes a lot faster, or has been for me, so that I can do like what I'm good at. Is I'm trying to think of it more as generalized learning. I'm good at a generalized intelligence, so I'm good at learning things. But I'm just kind of struggling there, because it's like how we're thinking about it. Because I also think about like, I went on a overnight river trip in West Virginia over the weekend with some friends, and we talked.
Like you had like the tent on the kayak or whatever, and you camped on the shore kind of thing,
exactly.
or what are we talking
tent
about?
along, camped on the shore. Actually, I like to sleep open, like in a hammock, just under the stars. So that's what I did.
Oh, you know what? I totally like followed a YouTube rabbit hole down the whole hammock thing, and I've been dying to. All right, so offline,
we'll
I'm
have to,
ask you about your
and
experiences.
I have some good answers for you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, okay, great,
and we're
great,
talking
great.
about, one thing is kind of like thinking of animals as we were saying, talking about animal consciousness and kind of talking about like, wow, have you seen those TikTok videos where this animal did X, Y, and Z, where it's clearly either showing some learning behavior, and I'm like comparing them to my students and being like, well, they might be doing better in some instances, kind of thing. I'm like, wow. And my friend's response was, yeah, but this is a very specialized intelligence, very kind of limited. It's not that generalized like human intelligence. And I guess my point in bringing that up is saying it's almost as if when we say good at something, we're almost talking about people as if they are animals that are very specialized, and does that make sense?
Oh, good.
Yeah, like in others, do what you're good
I think
at.
I follow
right,
you.
is what you had mentioned, right? So I guess I'm trying to pick apart kind of like how we talk about being good at something, and whether it is as human as we are kind of like assuming. Because to me, it's like, what's a bird good at? Flying, period. What's a good bird at? They also have kind of perceptual frameworks that go along with flying. So they're good at that too. And we're not good at that. They have like, probably a much better idea of kind of depth and all that, because they are kind of going up and down so much more in terms of the sky or whatever. Just a more, there's those things. And I guess my problem with the, do what you're good at thing for humans is, first of all, addressing what I just said is just, it doesn't seem like, it seems like we could be like good at things very quickly. And so it's like a question of like how fast and, it's about like the speed of learning and our relationship with time, I guess. But I don't know. The reason, and the more interesting thing I think is Savant syndrome, you kind of start there. And so,
what do you mean? Define
Savant syndrome is
the
the PC version of being an idiot savant. And so it's the idea you have an island of genius, and then there's a lot of other struggles around that island. And the most extreme cases are people kind of waking up and being able, one day being able to play the piano at an incredible level without having learned it, And so then it's kind of, to me, that there's just like multiple layers of nebulous stuff around this just simple idea of being good at something. And to me, like when I look at the factors, I'm thinking, well, it's epigenetic knowledge base. I know that might be a little controversial, but that's what I feel. We don't understand it, but it seems as if we show up with a subconscious framework that we are like, kind of like birds wake up knowing the right song to sing, that we are compared. And
for those listeners who feel like this is like too nutty crunchy or whatever, I would suggest that Noam Chomsky, for all his political whatever, is very academically well known for his at once controversial and now I think widely accepted view that humans come into the world primed to learn language. Not that, they know language, but that they have the necessary structure sort of pre-built. And then it's just a question of like, which language will fill that shape, right? It's like, they might learn any language. It's like, no, all human languages have certain commonalities that reflect the way that humans come pre-built for language, not a particular language, but language in general. Sorry, just a little side.
Absolutely. And then you also have, and then it can go more concrete and specific than just the general capacity for language. Apparently, kind of, unless there's something I'm missing, but it's just like people who've really been studying Savant syndrome are thinking like, this is calendar counting, for example, where you can, you know what that is.
Sure.
Right? I'm assuming listeners know. That's when you can forecast a date way in the future.
What's your birthday? Oh, that was a Thursday.
I know that immediately, but go way into the future, way into the past, and just know exactly what day of the week it is on a specific date at any time. And these same individuals are incapable of doing basic multiplication, some of them. So the idea, so like it's as if this like memory is downloaded. Again, there's probably explanations I don't understand, but like to me, it's as if there are degrees of epigenetic knowledge that plays a role in each individual's intelligence that varies based on the individual, and the degree being from general framework, like I can learn a language, to specific, very specific knowledge. Again, I'm just saying I don't understand that, and I'm trying to create an encompassing theory that includes these like oddball situations, and we haven't yet. We just haven't. No one has. And
well, I don't know that we have like a clear understanding, but we do have some theories that seem to match the data pretty well, and they'll probably be revised a number of times. But just to kind of throw in there, so my buddy Pete, you
probably
Pete,
know some of these individuals are savants, people with Savant syndrome. Or more, they're like not really the bad parts as much, or the challenges.
I don't know anyone who identifies as having Savant syndrome, but I certainly know some people who are closer to that than most people are. I'll just put it that way. I'm thinking about my buddy Pete, not in that exact context, but he at a party. So he's a former professional poker player, and he's a performance-based tutor, and he does it. He's a champion bridge player. He's a smart guy, and there are some aspects, like we've talked about this in depth, Pete and I, and there are some aspects of his brilliance that he comes by just like naturally, like he doesn't know where it comes from. There are other parts he's had to work for. Okay, whatever. And he taught me, just as like a 3-minute side conversation at a party once, here's how you do calendar counting. And he like just walked me through the algorithm. And I'm like, okay, I'd need to write that down and look at it for a while, right? But it was clear to me that if I had written it down, I would be able to do that thing. And the way that I would do it is I would follow this particular algorithm that has been sort of optimized to make sense for those of us who can hold a lot of in our head and do calculations quickly. Okay, great. So that's all good. But Savant syndrome, I don't even want to say my understanding, my belief, my, uninformed, layman's understanding of that is that it's almost as though vast quantities of the mental mechanism, the brain or whatever, get sort of rerouted from their more normal or more standard operation and instead get shunted into these very narrow operations. Where, okay, right. So you've got all, your entire brain can do this thing. I'm thinking of this one guy who's made the talk show rounds as of, 15 years ago or something like that, who's, God, I wish I could remember his name. I can see his face. He came to, he had like a savant, he had an experience that triggered something like Savant syndrome without losing a bunch of other abilities. And he has sort of the classic, almost synesthetic kind of associations where he thinks of a 3-digit number and he can feel whether it's prime because it just has a certain shape to it, right? And he uses color words and shape words and whatever, suggesting that there's, the thing that you would normally be using to get around your neighborhood or, whatever has been redirected towards assigning, geometric properties to these abstract, that kind of thing. But one of the things that comes up, so God, such a broad topic. I'm going to possibly purposefully misinterpret your initial question for the purpose of having you narrow it down. So I'll make a thing and you'll be like, oh no, you're off track. And then you'll bring me back on track by narrowing down what you want to get into. So the first thing that comes up for me around how good are you is I am the fastest person in the world as a runner, if in the world we consider me and all rocks not involved in an avalanche.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, you're good at something compared to what, right? And the reason that I, make up that sort of dumb example is that for most people, it's a question of what am I good at compared to you? And it doesn't cross their mind, how good am I at this thing compared to me of a year ago or a month ago or a year in the future or, or whatever it may be. Because the fact is, let's say that I'm, better at math than you are. I don't know if that's true, but let's just say, right? It's like, okay, there's a lot of evolutionary whatever. And there's a lot of cultural pressure to identify what can you do that most people can't do because there's competitive advantage in that. And for those of you, or for you, who aren't versed in the economics piece, it turns out that if I'm sorry, this is going all over the place. Let's pretend I'm the US and you're Podunk Island, wherever Podunk Island is, and there are two commodities in the world that people care about, commodity A and B. Let's say coffee and oil. I don't know. I'm just making this up. Let's say that it takes me 3 units of energy to produce a unit of coffee and 5 units to make oil. And it takes you 30 and 50 respectively to make coffee and oil, or the other way around or something. There's still situations in which our trading makes us both more efficient, even though I'm strictly better at all the things, just because of the nature of leveraging comparative advantage, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, and I'm making it very badly, whatever, is that if I can identify a thing that I do that's better than most people can do it, then I can bring value to myself and value to them by trading them. And that's a big part of our thought. But that's a completely separate process from, I would like to be better at thus and such thing. How quickly can I become more skilled at this thing, and what benefits can I get? Not because of competitive advantage, but because I would like to be better at that. I'd like to be able to play the piano, right? It's just purely for pleasure. Or, people consider me to be, intense and unfriendly. It's like, well, okay, clearly I shouldn't be a salesperson. But it's like, maybe working on being less intense and more friendly would benefit me. And I'm never going to be a salesperson or whatever, but, there's still something there. So help me understand through these kind of contrived examples.
I think that makes sense. Right.
Where are you trying to bring me
to like the straightforward kind of, it's like, within the framework of the world that we live in now and the things that are deemed important, I think like it's bringing value is more about, and again, these words I'm using a little bit liberally, but more about globalization than innovation, in other words, meaning that it's like what you're already good at, and then you're manifesting that in the world versus, and again, this is within the self, like global, kind of that's projecting out kind of what you're good at, putting that out there, whatever that action behavior is in a replicable manner.
Sure.
Versus innovation. And so I guess my point is that I think that along the list of things that we think that we were talking about as important about how you should decide what to do in your life, that it seems as if we're saying, well, there's things that, you add immediate value based on what you're comparatively already good at. That's a piece of what should be going on, because you need to do that basically to survive in the society. And the reality is that this isn't just true for the common individual. This is true for scientists, because scientists are not getting funding for like just those kind of out there ideas at the same level that they were in like the 60s and 70s, for example. So it's like the reality of our context is dictating that. And it's also dictating that in like K through 12 itself, right? Like it's really kind of like just the whole system is really about like what you're already good at and just showing that and then being able to move on. So I guess I think that the point is just in terms of the neurological realities, there be some balance of things where you don't have to think so hard. You're already good at, that's your brilliance, the thing that and then there's the thing that you're working on, and that might be the same thing that, like, for example, like in this podcast, I feel like I'm good at talking about ideas like this because that's all I think about, but I'm also learning because I'm talking to Wes, and Wes is giving me stuff I haven't thought about before. So I guess I'm the thing, the part about humans being good at things is kind of the percent breakdown between the epigenetic base. Let's say there's something there. The kind of neurological specific, like, my memory is good, my processing is bad, or, whatever, my attention is bad, but this is good, kind of thing.
Okay.
And then there's, what else is there? I guess then it's just the bend that happens over the course of someone's life. So I think that, I guess my main problem with what I'm good at is just that phrase plays into this very static way that we view ourselves. In the sense, like, I'm good at you know what I mean? And so that's my main thing, is that, like, it's almost like people should say, like, I could be good at this. Like, this is a path for me where the stressors to get there are not going to, like, knock me off my perch. This is within the framework of, like, you know, a tenable learning experience, let's say. And kind of being more kind of cautious around, like for example, I'm not going to go into nuclear physics right now because I'm like 5 steps away. But I might, you know, I'm thinking about the brain a lot because all I, you know, see is like that manifestation of the brain in a tutoring session. So I think it's something that I wish people thought about more, because I'm telling kids, like, hey, like, you're judging yourself based on what your parents gave you. Like a gift, nothing that you worked for. You know, the kids who are coming into school and like, no big deal, this is easy. But I just think it can explain a lot of things in terms of why certain groups of people have an easier time with school and why certain groups of people are having harder times with school. You know, that can follow along all kinds of lines, but usually, you know, at least economic, and then definitely, and then how that plays into racial stuff. But let's just keep it on the economic side. That, like, you know, I just feel like there's something around, you know, my grandfather went to school every day and he was the valedictorian of his school, and he became an English professor. And then my mom, got straight A's. She was the valedictorian of her high school. And then I was the failure. I wasn't the valedictorian, but, you know, I was like pretty darn smart and good at everything that they're good at without even trying. And I'll ask kids who are, you know, like a kid who's killer at tennis. And I'm like, so, you feel like a natural? Yeah. Do your parents play? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, yeah, well, and when you started out, did you notice that you like kind of like were ahead of the pack? I said, yeah, of course. But then they take that as like, because it's me, I'm the best, you know, but it's like, no, that's your parents. That wasn't even you. You just showed up with those gifts. And I guess like that's the framework. That framework, when I apply it, it's helpful. I don't know if it's right, but like it helps me kind of navigate, because it's almost a guarantee that that same person who has all this epigenetic like background will be kind of shitty at learning because they're not used to authentic learning. It's like they have this like subconscious, it's, again, as it appears to me in my experience of it, is subconscious framework comparing reality to, so that allows them to not just like understand the specific version of an idea in a single moment, but also multi-contextualize it almost immediately, you know, like it's nothing. And I just think that like the idea that like just, our, you know, pattern seeking, you know, that like that processing ability is what's causing that. I don't know. I think that's bullshit. I just, doesn't seem like enough to really, to get stuff at that level the way the smartest kids I work with do. It's like, I call them one-time kids. I tell you, when we talk about it one time, they got it forever, seemingly, you know, at least
single try learning.
Right. Single try learning. And that's it. Right. Like, and those kids are very rare. Like I'm probably a 2-time learner, you know, and unless, but maybe I'm getting closer to 1, but I don't like, that's the thing that I keep thinking about is like, I can't explain that other than just saying, oh yeah, this is an inherited epigenetic knowledge base and that's it. You know, I don't know. What do you think about that, Wes? I know it's kind of controversial and out there, I'd say, but,
there's a lot of different places I can take that. I feel like here's the response I'm going to pick is, I was talking to a kid in a tutoring session earlier today, in fact, and we were talking about a particular technical challenge that he was faced with, which was a time test, a specialized time test that we were preparing him for. And we observed that it would be beneficial for him to earn on the order of a little over 1.5 points per minute while he's on the test. But we also observed that there's no real benefit to him in knowing that 1.5 points per minute is the par time, because if it leads him to push himself to go faster, he's just going to collect additional careless mistakes. So it was a fact that was true, but not helpful. Okay. And what we then had to look at is, okay, what aspect of this whole thing is helpful? And what we landed on was, it's helpful to know when, due to anxiety or whatever, you're moving faster than your optimal pace, or for that matter, slower. Right? Your optimal pace is where like you're not wasting any time, but you're also not inviting careless mistakes. And it turns out it's hard to find what that pace is. Okay. So for me, it's not helpful in the context of my normal framework or my work to think about whether these things are epigenetic and so on. I mean, I wrote a book called How to Be a Brighter Student, and one of my early readers, the parent of a student of mine, objected to something I'd had in an early draft where I said, brightness can be learned. And she said, bright is bright. She was very adamant about this. Now, keep in mind, this is someone who's hired me to help her daughter think in a more efficient way. The entire value exchange is predicated on the idea that I can improve the way the daughter thinks. And here she's saying to me, bright is bright. There's a fixed quality to it. And the thing is, like, she's right. I mean, I don't think there's any person in the world who can take a person with low G, general intelligence, whatever you want to say about that thing, like coming from 2 standard deviations below to 3 standard deviations above. Like, I just don't see that happening. Okay. We can talk about the ways in which the measurement is flawed, and there are many dimensions to that. But, you can move the needle, but you don't get to set it where you want to set it. Like there are limits. Still, right? So there's this combination, right? There's this thing that your mental engine is only so powerful, right? But from a hardware perspective. But there's also a software perspective that is mutable. Like, just because you think quickly or you think well or you make many connections or whatever doesn't make you smart. It means you have the capacity to be effective if you're running good software. And I mean, the analogy to computers here is very good, right? If you have a powerful computer running a good operating system, and running good programs or whatever, you're going to get good results that are targeted at the whole system. Whereas if you try to run a modern program on a 10-year-old machine, it's not going to go well. And if you run a bunch of crap freeware on a modern machine, it's not like you're going to, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't, you got to have all those pieces. So for me, when I'm thinking about this, it's much less about
it seems like it's neurological function plus frameworks, like, so that when you see the thing, you have the context
schemata, so
that you're like, oh, I get the thing in the way that I'm supposed to get it because I have the required context that's beyond, that I need. So it's like, I mean, honestly,
and that's why books are so powerful. It's like, guess what? I'm not as smart as Plato. I'm just not. And that's never going to change. But guess what? He put down some of his greatest thoughts into books that I can read, and then they're mine. I got to have those thoughts too. Like, he thought them first, but whatever. I can think them whenever I want to because he's, you know what I mean? And it's true for Plato and Einstein and, whoever, right? Whatever your interest is, there's somebody who's better at it than you are who has given you the software. You read the book and then it's like, okay, now I've got the software. And the thing is, like, I think that there are things that you can do to change the quality of your hardware. It's not that you can't change the quality of your hardware. It's that it is almost invariably easier to change your software. So focus there.
Yeah, that's true. And except I may have the secret to change the hardware, but with the mold thing and all that, right?
Well, I mean, let's be clear, right? If I'm to overuse the analogy, if I've got some computer and it's constantly overheating and downclocking itself so that it doesn't blow up, well, okay. I mean, that's a hardware issue, right? Get a new fan, get a new whatever, right?
That sounds like me.
At least somewhat analogous to what you're talking about. Right. That's what I'm saying. It's analogous to the thing you're talking about, right? You've got this circumstance happening that is not the way the machine is designed to operate. And yet you're trying to operate the machine in this environment. Okay, well, in that case, let's fix the machine, fix the environment, get it doing what it's supposed to do instead of this, kind of half-baked attempt to survive this toxic environment. Sure, 100% agree.
And that's a good reframing for me, that I'm just trying to say, hey, hardware is important too, kind of thing. And we're not, there's some bugs and, all that kind of stuff. So I think,
for sure.
Yeah, but sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. And you get into, I'm sorry. I'm on a tear. I just read. I don't mean to do like the whole shout out thing, and I've got no reason to say this other than I was interested in it. But I read Peter Attia's book Outlive, which very, very big picture is about like, here's a bunch of stuff we know about what happens to people when they age. And like one of the things that happens is their balance gets worse and their strength gets less and their cardiovascular fitness goes down and they tend to pick up things like cancer and heart disease and all this stuff. And it's like, well, you know, some of the like cancer, we don't really know what's going on there exactly, but we have some ideas of some things that are linked. But with respect to the decline in physical strength, we're very clear on what happens there. Right? It's like if you want to be able to put your carry-on into the overhead bin when you are 90, assuming you make it that far, then given how quickly we lose strength, working backwards from there, if you want to be able to put your luggage into the overhead bin at 90, you have to be able to lift this large weight over your head when you're 50, or when, you know, whatever the math is, right? But he's just connecting this stuff all up, and it's like, oh, you put that all together, and it's like, there's no rocket science here. It's just like, oh, I just never thought on that kind of time scale. It's like, oh gosh, I better get to the gym. Not because I want to look great for the beach, but because assuming I make it to 90, I want to be able to do stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's the way it all plays, right?
That makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. And it's and I think it's really worth the time to think about those things, right? Because it's like I think that like really thinking into the future more in that specific way and kind of projecting ourselves more in a kind of self-care type of way it seems very like that seems foreign for me at least, or at least a lot of people. It's like, it's so kind of like, you know, who am I now? And not really thinking about old gray Ian in the future, and what that would look like and what I need to be doing. Right. It's more like, yeah, I think, you know what, that's good, because I think it's grounded in awareness of your own death. You know, and that's what I think that's when people really start to learn, is when you really accept your own death. So that ego that's trying to preserve you doesn't continue to bark, and you can think more, you know, calmly about life. You know, so my little joke to myself is like, I just pretend like I already know when I'm going to die. Oh, I already know. So it's like, I don't need to worry, you know, and it's helpful, that kind of fiction for yourself to be like, yeah, I know it's going to be in a plane crash landing when I'm like 80 or something. I know it. I had a dream about it, you know, but yeah, I think that can be super helpful. But to kind of come back to the epigenetic and the, here's the, I mean, sure. I'll just say my crazy idea, and then, you know, we can,
okay.
It's that one, I think that the three major factors are, you know, hardware, software, and then a kind of fourth dimension, which I think is love. Because like, even when we talk about like, you know, people who have those amazing number abilities with numbers, like they love numbers. They love it. Like as if they, like a lot of these savant syndrome people will talk about numbers as if like they're friends, like Bob and, you know, John and Tim and Susie and all that, you know? Yeah. And yep. I think I see different individuals have different capacities for love, you know, like in that, like in the sense that like, you know, this outward focus that's like passionate, curious, and wanting to like, I don't know how to describe love. I could say a poem or something, but the point is that then like the outside world is on your mind in a different, like almost obsessive way if you're falling in love with the outside world and everybody in it. And I think that there's something about, so here's a good example. I mean, I met this, you know, high-powered investment. She has her own investment kind of firm or whatever. So she runs her whole thing, Stanford Business School, and she's telling me, she's like, yeah, actually, my two siblings and I are all you know, C-suite executives at very serious situation, you know, things. And she's like, yeah, and like, this is part of her, like a bit of hers about like, yeah, like when she's interviewing, and she's just say like, yeah, like, it's crazy because both of my parents were in the Peace Corps, and who would have thunk, you know, that we would all end up these very serious kind of like, doing this. And I'm like, I'm not surprised based on my framework, not surprised in the least, because I feel like love is a cheat code to learning things really quickly, especially when you're thinking from other people's perspective. And if you're in like Asia and Africa, thinking from people's perspective that are very different from you, then that's a really great mental exercise, and you love these people, then you are assimilating all this stuff, and then you have kids right after that. And if I'm right about there's being like the things you learn in life are passed down at some level, unfair advantage. I mean, this woman is the best to talk to. She is so freaking smart. And she has like the combination of funny, you know, like very aware, everything. And, you know, just knock your socks off kind of person. And I'm like, I don't know if this is like, I keep seeing this everywhere I look. So I don't know what the science is exactly, but I'm like, love and being able to perceive are very connected. Because I think it's back to our kind of discussion of Umwelt. It's a shortcut to get outside of your world and into somebody else's. So that's not the controversial. The controversial thing is, I feel like some people have the genetics that, and it might have to do with the mold thing, where there's a shortcut to your subconscious, whether it's genetically, you know, it's like whether it's like a epigenetic thing, or it's just like what you see in life, you are like picking up on all this stuff, and now you are able to integrate your subconscious awareness with your conscious awareness far more fluidly than the next guy. Then you have more context than the next guy to get the thing, to have the framework. That's what it feels like for me, because I'm just, I mean, again, I haven't been proved wrong yet, but it seems like people who have more frameworks, that they weren't necessarily, you know, like they didn't necessarily learn in life, or maybe they did, but not consciously, just kind of subconscious, picking things up around the edges of their conscious focus. This seems to be it. I don't know, because I think the frameworks are the most important thing, not the mental processor. If you have the frameworks, that's what makes you brilliant, because then you can get it. You get the joke. And especially for relevant brilliance to humanity, as opposed to learning something very random that's not necessarily valuable. But yeah, that's a lot.
Okay.
There's a lot
right
there, but
no, that's okay. Yeah, there is. So I want to suggest, first of all, that we started off by talking about what humans are good at relative to animals and stuff like that. And I think obviously, we as humans are very strongly motivated to justify how we are superior to other animals. But, and there are a lot of sort of BS excuses we've given, you know, in past years about how we're better than animals, how we're better than AI. And those BS excuses keep changing as animals and AI both prove to be able to do some of the things that we said only humans can do, right? But one of the things that has remained relatively constant, at least in comparing us or contrasting us with animals, I don't know about AI, is our ability to rejigger our hardware such that, like by running other software, such that we can take a generally good engine and make it good at doing specific things. We can train to become good at skiing, to become good at prime factorization of large numbers, to become good at speaking Greek, to be, you know, whatever it is, right? We can, as you say, right, you can be good at learning. You can learn some of the ways that you can speed acquisition of new skills. And from that jumping off point, I want to bring in someone to the conversation I did not see coming into the conversation, which is Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right-hand man. He's written a lot of stuff. And I had a buddy who was at Stanford Law School, and Charlie came in and spoke to, I don't know, 40 or 50 of us because I was this buddy's guest. And I took 11 pages of notes that day, you know, and I've referred back to them over the years because he really is, he's a brilliant guy. In one sense, he's very specialized in finance, but in another sense, the reason he's so good at what he does, in large part, or so he would tell you, and I have no reason to doubt him, is that he has many different frameworks to see things through, right? And that's one of the things that he brought on that day, and I've seen in print among his writing, is the idea that he's had many successes, and one can have many successes from being able to view a situation from multiple different specialist frameworks at the same time. And you've said any number of times, being able to see something from the other guy's perspective is emotionally powerful and therefore generally powerful. He's talking on a more intellectual basis about being able to look at a plot of land and see it how a surveyor sees it, see it how a farmer sees it, see it how a landowner sees it, see how a, all that kind of
it's like the same thing as you have your CEO and then you have your marketing director, you have your finance person, and the ideal CEO is already thinking from all of those people's perspectives and like deeply, and then just double checking and that everyone's kind of going along that so that makes perfect sense to me. And that the multiple intersecting perspectives is also something I talk about with the SAT. It's like, hey, you should think about the test maker's perspective, your perspective, the kid who's a little smarter than you's perspective, the kid who's, is not. That's like, there's a wrong answer for everybody. So try to
There's a wrong answer for everybody. I love that.
Yeah.
That's right. And so one of the things that comes up is, on one hand, if your goal is to get good at a thing, don't worry about your hardware, upgrade your software, right? Learn new frameworks to apply to blah blah blah, and you'll max out your success. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that software is the only thing you pay attention to. Like, ask me why I'm not a professional basketball player. I'm 5'8" on a good day. I'm never going to be a professional. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Plus, I'm old. Like, I haven't been doing it since I was a kid, right? There is no, I could train as hard as a human could possibly train, and I would gain enormous basketball skill, and I would still not be as good as a Division I, collegiate whatever, right? There's just no way. So it's not that there's a right answer. It's that understanding the framework in which all this stuff happens is crucial to making good decisions as you navigate your way through life. If my goal is to get the maximum possible SAT score, becoming smarter is not my game. It's not useful. Getting better at acquiring new frameworks, that's useful, right? If I'm at the very low end of the scale, then maybe learning some facts is also, rules of grammar and, definitions of words and basic math techniques and whatever. But as you crawl up the scale, it's less about learning, you don't need to do calculus for the SAT. You need to have different frameworks for thinking about stuff that you already know, right? And again, it's funny, I'm bringing up this whole hardware versus software thing because just last night I was talking with an old friend of mine, and I was confiding in him, as I will confide with you and anyone who sees this, that I've been in the middle of I don't want to call it like a directional crisis because it's not that big a deal, but I have had this moment of if I were to take the summer off, or if I were to dial down various, commitments that I have in order to increase focus, as we talked about earlier, what are some of the things that I would really enjoy having time for that I currently have no time for? What are some hobbies or vocations or whatever that, and I was really drawing a blank because I've been so focused on this one particular track that I've been on in work and in life for a while. And this good friend of mine said, well, you got to come back to what are you really good at? And in this context, he meant something very specific. He didn't mean what skills have you acquired. He meant looking back on all the things that you've done through your life that you've gotten positive feedback for and that you've enjoyed, what are the common threads, right? Because I got to tell you, athleticism is not the common thread for me. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, I enjoy a bike ride as much as the next guy, but it's like figure out, okay, here is a place where, where I have competitive advantage and or where I really enjoy sitting. Like annually, I do these incredibly hard puzzle competitions, not because I'm the smartest guy in the world or whatever, but because I happen to be attracted to that kind of frustration, And it's like, it's just that's who I am. Like, I think that's fun, I remember I was talking to my brother-in-law a couple of years ago, and I'm like, why do you put hot sauce on your food? He's like, well, I like the flavor and I like the blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it just seems like, why don't you just put ground glass on? Like, he's like, maybe hot sauce is not for you if that's how you perceive it, right? It's like there are some things where it's like he enjoys it. I'm allowed to not enjoy it. Ironically, I like hot sauce these days, but at the time.
So would you say that
when we talk
the limiting factors then are the hardware, unless we can change the hardware, and in terms of like what you're good at, and like the amount of like how much you love it, basically. Like what, or versus
Well,
curiosity?
so
or
I think
like
that's a big thing.
Opening that door.
No, I would not say that. Although I don't disagree with anything you've said, but I would pop up one level and invoke what I think is called constraint theory. There's some guy who wrote a business book, constraint theory. You can look him up. I don't remember his name, but his big notion was that the thing preventing a business from growing at any particular time is one particular bottleneck in the process, whatever the process is, and that if you fix anything else, like he